of it that says that the phone company, in particular Verizon, cannot sell off part of the state. We've seen them sell off whole states because they deem them not profitable anymore. That's fine. They're private companies now. But I don't want them to be able to say, well, you know what? We don't make a lot of money in those 4 western counties, and they're always complaining about their phone service. So we're going to sell them off. Well, Verizon might not be great to work with all the time. They can be on some things, and they've been responsive on some things. But they certainly are better than the alternative in many cases. So what we need to do is make sure that they're here and that they're providing the high level of service and the same level of service they would to someone if they were in Boston or a suburb of Boston.
Okay. We were talking just a few minutes ago about some of the past legislation. There's 2 things I wanted to bring up and get your comments on. The first was the appeals board for auto insurance. I know there was a bill passed that actually kept the board independent as opposed to letting the insurers decide on appeals, and I just wanted to get your take on that. And of course you mentioned ethics reform, but I'd like you to go just a bit deeper into that and actually kind of, everybody talks about public officials, kind of encapsulated for public officials what ethic reform is.
The good thing on the Insurance Appeals Board, I think the good thing was that, number one, we maintained it, and that there is still a process in place by which if someone feels like they were wrongly treated or mistreated by the auto insurance company, they know where to go, and they don't have to simply fight with the company themselves. That there's that independent arbiter that can say, well, yes, this claim should have been filled out, or no, that claim shouldn't have been met, it isn't part of your policy. And I think there was pretty much a unanimous opinion, especially in the Senate, around that. And that's not to say that it was it's not to say that we don't understand why the governor proposed it. The budget's that difficult to deal with at this point, but we thought that there are certain things that you need to keep in place, even if we may not be able to support them at the level that we want to. When it comes to ethics reform, the real thing that we were trying to focus on with ethics reform is not saying that all public officials are bad. They aren't. We know that. But we do know that when some of our colleagues abuse their position for their own gain or abuse their position to harm other individuals, then people rightly are skeptical of all of us, and they say, well, what are you doing to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Now, we could pass any number of different ethics reform bills, and it won't change what's in someone's heart. If someone's going to find a way to abuse a system, they will find a way to abuse even a perfect system. So what we tried to do was to be clear about having a gift ban in place so that people can't receive gifts. Elected officials cannot receive gifts. We tried to put more stringent campaign finance laws in place, so there has to be more reporting closer to election dates. What we found was that many people were making rather large donations to candidates in the closing moments and minutes and hours before a campaign, trying to leverage that into getting them to take actions to maybe enrich them or their own special interests. And we tried to do other things too, by making sure that if someone's working at a law firm and they claim not to be a lobbyist, but they are actually coordinating all the strategy for the passage of a legislation, making calls, but maybe they never set foot in the State House. Well, you're a lobbyist. You know, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck, even if it might not walk into a particular building. So those are some of the types of things we tried to do, try to focus on transparency, and we've tried to work through some of the kinks in that as well. It's not a perfect thing, but certainly it's the direction we ought to be heading in around transparency, making sure that people have access to what we're doing in the State House, and making sure that they know that we are there working for them. We are not there working on our own accord. In politics, perception's reality. Absolutely.
And that is, I love saying that because it is so true. And you get one rotten apple in a barrel, the old saying, and it really just stinks the place up. And you could pass 1,000 ethics reform bills and 1,000 campaign finance bills, and you got to account for we account for every cent now, but literally you could account for a quarter of a cent, and it's still perception when one elected official runs astray. And certainly not to justify that, but when that happens, it's just like, oh, the whole kick all the bums out. You always hear that, and I understand people's frustrations. It's annoying, but again, perception's reality, and you just got to do what you got to do and keep moving forward. Casino gambling, it's still a hot button issue. I wanted to get your take on it, and particularly your your thoughts on whether the speaker's version of gambling with racinos will pass.
Yeah, I voted against the casino bill last session. I felt like in many ways there wasn't an independent analysis of what the actual costs and benefits would and wouldn't be. We had several studies largely supported by the gambling industry, which said here are all the benefits, and we didn't really see the costs, whether those costs were planning costs, whether they were infrastructure costs, additional service costs, or enforcement costs. That's not to say that that'll necessarily come out one way or the other, but we ought to have an independent study of it that everyone can agree to and say, all right, those are the costs, those are the benefits, now we can plan for it one way or the other. Despite that, there was a pretty overwhelming majority in both the Senate and the House that voted for the bill, and you had the disagreement in the end over whether or not there would be slots at the remaining racetracks. I think it is kind of ridiculous when we're talking about casino gambling as a way to raise revenue that we would simply grant to those racetracks a license to have slot machines that we know will make them millions and millions of dollars.
Yes.
It is the ultimate no big contract. I have no problem if we are going to have slots in the Commonwealth that they be at racetracks, but let's have the owners of those racetracks actually bid for it and maximize the amount of benefit that will come back, whether that benefit accrues to the state or to cities and towns. So there were many problems I had with the final version of the bill. Now, you could easily see a world in which a bill that allows for 3 resort-style casinos passes both the House and the Senate and is signed by the governor. But ultimately, that would require the House to change their position,
yes.
Which was a firm position in support of those racetracks. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I do know, and I've been heartened to hear this, that the Speaker is focused first on the budget, along with probation and parole reform proposals to try and fix that board and that agency, and then is talking about healthcare cost containment. Only after those things has he mentioned casinos as a priority. And I think that's important. I think that should be the way that we move through things this session. The budget, probation and parole, healthcare, which is still one of the biggest issues that we face. And then if we're going to have a casino debate, let's have it. And hopefully let's end it once and for all this year.
I get the take just from watching the local media and talking to people. There's a sense of weariness about the whole casino.
There's a Groundhog Day quality to all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're for or against casinos, I think a lot of people are, boy, we got to get this resolved one way or the other and be done with it. So speaking of the budget, I wanted to get your take on what you think this year's budget will be, and in general, are we kind of out of the recessionary woods, so to speak? It seems like there's some signs that things are looking certainly a lot better, but do you think we're out of them? Do you think we got another couple of years to go? What's your take on things?
I'm reminded of the line that the night is always darkest before the dawn. I think that the fiscal year 2012 budget that we are going to be dealing with will probably be the most difficult of the budgets that we've dealt with over the past couple of years, which is saying something, because we've seen revenues precipitously drop, largely because more and more people are out of work. So I think this will be a very difficult budget year. If we can get through this budget year, and I'm confident that we can, no matter how painful it may be, I think the years ahead look very good. The reason this year is going to be so difficult is the last 2 years we've had support from the federal government. Absolutely. We no longer have support from the federal government by way of the federal stimulus bill. We also do not have as much left in our rainy day account to draw on as we've been able to in the past. When this recession started, we had $2.1 billion in our rainy day account. Now we are in the $300 to $400 million range. And I know there are many people who say, well, just draw on that. That'll help solve the problem. Well, yes, it could. But if we just draw on that, we are unable to fund unexpected costs. So a massive plowing bill that we know we're going to get from all the snowstorms we've had this year. If there were to be another ice storm, we'd be unable to fund that. If we have a particularly bad agricultural season and we would have to do something to support our farmers, we may be unable to do that. So we need to have that cushion remaining in that account.
Yes.
So this is all a long way of saying I think this will be a very difficult budget year. I think the budget that the governor put forward is a good starting point. on a lot of different matters, but it leaves a lot of unanswered questions as well. He proposes